Welcome to the All Access Entertainment Podcast. I am your host, Joseph Bruen. With me this week, a very special guest. He is a lifelong photographer, a legendary photographer with legendary stories, and we're about to talk about some of those right here on this episode. Mr. Scott Romer, welcome to the show.
I appreciate being invited to talk to you, and I would have to say your artwork on the logo that you made for me as for my appearance, that was first class. So you had a very, very good impression. So I'm very anxious to talk to you about my career.
I appreciate it. Yes, I'm very excited about this, and I've always been a fan of behind the scenes individuals that maybe don't get talked about as much as often as they should. Photographers and people that really bring the show to a whole. The spotlight's always on the big stars, and I like to kind of feature people who are big stars behind the scenes and tell their story. I was a ring announcer for over 10 years and been in the industry for 28 years now, and I love to feature people like yourself. So let's rewind to the very beginning. Growing up as a child or young adult, when did you first discover pro wrestling? Who were some of your favorites?
The first time I discovered pro wrestling, I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. Never been to a wrestling show before, but Requiem for a Heavyweight, an old black and white film with Jackie Gleason and Mickey Rooney, Anthony Quinn starred in it. And it was an old black and white film. It was about a down and out fighter that they turned into a pro wrestler. And, and they were asking him to take dives and kind of exposing the business. And he had so much pride as a fighter that he was against it. And it ended, I think, with Haystacks Calhoun or somebody pinning him or him dressed up as an Indian. But it was so emotional and it really touched my heart. The characters in the movie reminded me of uncles and cousins and stuff, and they were wise guys. And I was with my grandfather, and he put me on the lap, so I had the companionship of being with my grandfather. And like I said, I fell in love with it. Then I would turn on the TV. We had wrestling on Channel 4. And it was a station that never came out real clear. So we had rabbit ear antennas. And at 5 years old, I would do whatever I can just to see it. Everybody else was in the kitchen or not doing anything. It was on maybe at noon. And I watched the wrestlers on TV. And again, it wasn't real clear, but they were yelling at each other. And it reminded me of adults. They were adults doing it. It reminded me what I would hear on the playground. I'll beat my dad's, I'll beat you. I'll wipe the snot right off of your face. I heard that on the playground. They would tell me that, you know what I mean? Yeah. I had really never been in too many fist fights, on the playground or in real life for that matter. But it reminded me and it rang a bell and it stuck with me. And to this day, I've loved it. Then I found out in middle school, I was talking about it, and David McLean of Women Are Wrestling and Glow, the founder of both the organization and is still very involved in the business, he knew the names as well. And it brought us together and we became best friends in grade school all the way up to high school. And then he went off to college, and I went on to work with Pro Wrestling Illustrated and, with Bill After, Gong Wrestling Magazine, like I mentioned, Wally Yamaguchi. And so we both had a significant part in wrestling. What happened was in the 8th grade, we both went to a private grade school where we kind of took control. And built a ring with out of boxes and and big cardboard rolls, and we put on a wrestling show with the permission of the school. We had the whole school do it, or as the participants, as the audience, and we brought in Sam Miniker, who was the Bruisers ring announcer and color commentator at the time. So it was really a first class organization, and we were the wrestlers were the grade school students, and we were really potatoing each other. And we had Sam Miniker, like I said, as the ring announcer. Then we used vampire blood, and the kindergartners were hysterical, and the parent and the and we were acting like we were getting beat up and we were bleeding everywhere, and they were crying, and the teachers took the kindergartners back to their rooms. It was too graphic for them. And after the show, Sam Miniker said, "You guys were the biggest disgraces I've ever seen. Using the fake blood, Jimmy Valiant's head will never be the same." Then he took David McLean behind the lockers where we didn't see him. He said, "Man, that was a hell of a show. You're going to be a hell of a promoter one day."
Wow.
And it got back to Dick the Bruiser, and David and I we became the official photographers at 15 years of age, and he was even younger, a year younger than me, for World Wrestling Association. And he also made Sam Miniker take us to the shows. My mom used to pick me and David McLean up and drop us off at Miniker's house. And Miniker usually had a big legend with him, John Studd or Lou Thez, and we would be in the back seat driving to the shows. So, they had guards on the back outside. They'd see us walk in, through the back with Sam Miniker. And all of a sudden we were important. We had access to the backstage. You know what I mean? And then he found we had access to the ring, and we were taking pictures, keeping low key, taking pictures, and they were good. And we started selling them during intermission and making a handful of money at 15 years of age. I don't think I've ever made that kind of money before. You know what I mean? During the 15 minutes of an intermission, we would sometimes walk out with $150, $200. Back then it was good. And we did that for a while. And Dick didn't know we were selling the pictures. And he finally heard about it. And he called us upstairs. And he had a head cop. His name was Cecil Madalena. And he was a mean guy. And he had the most seniority of any cop in the police force. And so when he would say Bruiser wants to see you, it meant business. You know what I mean? And the heart is racing. And he had mine and Dave's pictures. And he said, "I hear you're selling these." "Yes, sir. We are. These are pretty good. I'm going to allow you to sell pictures, but I get 20%. And we weren't even freshmen at the time. And that meant we were allowed to sell pictures freely. And at the end of the night, we were upstairs in the dressing room waiting for Bruiser and Snyder with all the other wrestlers. They had a cooler of beer while they waited. It didn't matter whether they had an airplane to catch at 1 o'clock or whatever. Bruiser and Snyder made them wait forever. They would be called individually, and Bruiser would hand them their check that Snyder would write through Championship Wrestling. They would leave, say goodbye to the boys. And David and I were the last people to be called in. And we got to hang in the dressing room with Dick the Bruiser and Snyder while Bruiser drank his Japanese beer and Snyder drank champagne. and we were in awe. Bruiser was in. He and Snyder were both in their briefs, and
Yeah.
with their wanks, but with no shirts on, tan as hell, and we were in awe. We were with Dick the Bruiser, and we drank the beer that was in that cooler for the workers at 15 years of age, and we would leave the arena drunk. And Sam Miniker used to have to take us home. A long drive to take David and I home. He lived right off of 65, so downtown to 65 Kessler Boulevard was nothing. But he had to drive way up north and then way up north near Carmel, Indiana for me. No complaints or whatever, but we were with Sam Miniker. While he was driving, we were in the back seat looking at his cauliflower ears. We had a close and personal look, looking at the fine hairline with the shoe polish on the back of the hair to cover up the bald spot. I wasn't shoe polish; it was dye. But same with Luthez. We got an up close look, and we would point, look at the ears. While we were in the back seat, we were just in awe.
Yeah.
And Jacques Goulet was with us at times, and Big John Studd. And we'd walk in with those guys. I'm thinking about it, I'm still excited. You know what I mean? So thank you for letting me relive that memory. I didn't think about it.
Absolutely. And, when it comes to Dick the Bruiser, such a legend in the industry, what was he like behind the scenes? What type of man was he?
Well, he was a businessman first. He owned Championship Wrestling. He was very, very smart. Um, he was a good grandfather and a great surrogate father for me. You know what I mean? I would drive to the shows with him. He would put me in the back with his wrestling gear. He didn't wash the wrestling gear. You know what I mean? And there would be flies flying around it, and I would be in the back seat. And he would drop me off a block from the arena, and I would walk in. Oh, there's Saul Creechman, the fans waiting backstage, in line, you know what I mean? It was kind of dangerous, but it was fun. And then, but as a human, he was a family man, wanted his family with him at all times. And but also kind of a bully, if you didn't do what he wanted to do, he would sort of make it miserable for that moment. More of a rib than really try to hurt somebody, but they were still hurtful. I was next door neighbors with him, and number one is he had an intercom that led to my house to his house, so that way when he was in Florida, we would hear if somebody broke in, we would hear stuff. And people had broken into his house and stolen his guns before. So, you never knew when it was on my side. So, Michelle would say, Dad wants you to do this. Dad wants you to do that. I would say, fuck that asshole. Tell him to go fuck himself. And that's over on the intercom. And then he would come over and say, your wife told me that you told me to go fuck myself. So that would cause, why are you telling Dick that? Why are you telling your dad that? You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
didn't tell him that. Well, the intercom was on. You know what I'm
Oh,
saying? So that was before intercoms were popular, and there were, security cameras weren't really unheard of back in those days. Um,
sure.
he I worked selling motorcycles for my dad for a short time, and if a client came in needing some money and Dad said, I don't want that motorcycle, I would say, well, how much is it? I'll give you $100 for it. Sure, for his crack money or whatever. And I'd have a jalopy motorcycle that ran good, and I'd bring it home. And one time I got a phone call. You better come home. It was Bruiser. You better come home. I thought I heard somebody fiddling around in your garage. You better see if everything's okay. So I left work, and my motorcycle was missing. And
Oh,
he played on that. He hit it, and had me call the cops, and they filed a report. And he's winking at them. They're winking at him. And it was one of his ribs. You know what I mean? After I was crying, and my stepson said to me, Daddy, Papa Dick the Bruiser hid that motorcycle. It's in, behind his trees in his yard. And I found it, and he was mad that he wanted to keep on playing the rib. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
my stepson saw that I was so depressed that he wanted to reveal the truth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was, that was because the motorcycle, I took a draw out for it. I didn't make much money as a motorcycle salesman, but I took a draw out. So, you know, there's the $200 that I owed the company, and my motorcycle wasn't insured. So, um, but overall, the experiences, even the ribs, you know what I mean? They were, when you think about it, it was still fun. And to me, he was a great guy.
And you mentioned the great Wally Yamaguchi. For fans who are listening now and don't know who that is, why don't you first tell us, who he is in the or who he was in the industry, and of course, how your relationship started.
Um, I in high school, when I was shooting Bruiser shows, there was a Japanese person that Koichi was his name. Koichi Yasasori or something like that, but his first name was Koichi. I don't know if he was very big. He was he would find photographers in different areas, and he'd send them to him. He'd send them to Gong, and he would take a cut of the money, and I would get paid, and it was still more than I was, making. It was pretty good money still, you know what I mean? And one time, Bruiser ran a show, and I ran into Wally Yamaguchi. And Wally said to me, can you go to London, Ontario? And I was tomorrow. And he gave me like $1,000. I was going to drive to London, Ontario. And I heard Bobo Brazil and J.R. Hogg talking about the next show at London, Ontario. And I told them I got to be there too. Can I have a ride? Sure, you can. And I gave Bobo maybe $50 or whatever. We picked up Louis Martinez. I think we went to London, Ontario without stopping from that show. And all of a sudden, I've cut Koichi out. I'm with Wally Yamaguchi. I sent Wally the pictures, and they kept sending me all over the country
Yeah.
to do assignments, and I shot all the different territories. Even and because of my work in Japan, I was able to establish a ringside pass as the only photographer up at the ring with their own Steve Taylor with the WWF. So I was
Wow.
shooting WWF and all the different and NWA at the same time.
Any interactions with Steve Taylor at that time?
Yeah, of course, he was the other ringside photographer. He was very nice to me, and I was treated like a god because I was the other press photographer working for Japan. So Steve gave me a WWF working shirt, that had their logo on it. That all the workers, I felt like a king. I was wearing that around town. I wouldn't take that thing off. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But I would go to the after parties. He would introduce me to all the boys and Vince McMahon. And I sat down with Pat Patterson. He knew about me. He was with Brooklyn Brawler. He asked me to sit down. He knew all about me and my wrestling with Dick the Bruiser, and knew approximately how much I was getting paid. We were on TV, so there were stooges that sent all the TV tapes of different territories. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? To WWF. That way they could pick and choose people. I was one that they were thinking about picking. And
Wow.
I had just married Michelle, and her ex-husband was Spike Huber. He had just left her for a fan, and that's how I got Michelle. But the Bruiser and her weren't going to let me on the road. You know what I mean? I was more
Yeah.
used to pay the bills, and they needed me at home. So that wasn't really the question. But then again, for a moment there, I was going to get. I was offered a job with the WWF at the time, as a independent photographer for Gong magazine.
And what were your interactions like with Vince McMahon at that time?
Well, it was just, one of the ways I stayed irrelevant was I didn't get in anybody's way. I knew that my position in life with wrestling was very privileged. So I stayed. I didn't want him to see me as much. When I photographed in the corner, away from the gorilla position. You know what I mean? Um, and I did that with all the territories because I could be out in any minute. You know what I mean? And I was able to get away with working with WWF for a couple years until Actors Magazine reached out to Gong Magazine and got some of my work and published it in their magazine. And that was my exit out of the WWF. How did they get that? I don't know, blah, blah, blah. But I took the heat for it, and I was out. And
And
that was
those two
sort of
years
the,
that you were with them. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yes, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I
I
forgot
was
what you
just
said.
saying those 2 years that you were with WWF. What years were those roughly? Do you remember?
Well, they did their debut show when they went national in St. Louis. And they brought in Dan Dierdorf, and it was televised on, I think, NBC Live.
Okay.
And they had the Battle Royal. I think Hulk Hogan won it, and with Andre the Giant. I don't Mass Superstar, but that was 1984.
Hmm.
So I was able, and I became very popular with the WWF, and their guys gave me blank contracts. So if there was an area that I wanted to shoot, all I had to do was send them the contract to the date that I wanted to be at, and they would let me in. As I mentioned, my dad owned a motorcycle shop, and his prices for parts were a lot cheaper than New York parts. So the guy from the WWF used to order parts through me and get them a little cheap, which I'll kiss your ass, you kiss my ass type thing. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
And when you first started as photographer around 15 or 16, like you said, do you remember the type of camera that you had and how you went about getting your first camera?
Well, I was fascinated with cameras at a very young age, and back, when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, Bazooka Joe, the bubble gum, used to, they had their comic, and then on the bottom they had an advertisement, and one was a camera. And boy, it looked professional. And I said, I want one of those. So I sent in my 350 wrappers and $20 or whatever, and got my first camera. It was a roll camera. So, oh, look at what I got, and I'd open up the back and I expose the film because I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Then I got, I don't even know if I developed any pictures with that camera, but then I got and Kodak did Instamatic cameras, with
Yes.
the 126 cartridge and the flash cube. And that is what I used to, when I was 8 years old, I used to sneak up at the ring and take pictures with the flash cube. It was real hot. And you had 4 flashes on a cube, and then you'd have to dump it and put a new one on there. And they really weren't that bad. Now, the cops used to watch me, and then they'd throw me out. And I was a little kid, so I'd sneak over to the other side, ducking the cops like I would Vince McMahon or anybody with authorities, to stay as invisible as I can. My pictures were pretty good, even with the Instamatic.
Hmm.
Then when I started high school, I started using 35 millimeter, but they were rangefinder cameras.
Okay.
And so you would match the lines with to make it even into one. There were like 4 lines, you'd turn it into one, and that's how you focused it. And I went to a wrestling show and I took 2 pictures and entered them in a high school photo contest. They both won
Oh,
first
wow.
place. And Bruiser was so proud of it, and Sam Miniker, they put the pictures on TV with the ribbons on it and said Scott Romer did the picture and blah, blah, blah. I'm ahead of myself. What was the question?
Well, I just asked what your first camera was, but you kind of
Oh,
walked
okay,
us through
okay.
some of the different
And
cameras.
then I turned it into 35 millimeter. I never used a. They were all those two cameras were 35, the rangefinder, but then a single lens reflex. But I never used a very expensive camera during my entire ordeal as a photographer. There was always something that was really cool. I would see photographers with these great big lenses. I never used those for the longest time. I just used my 50 millimeter lens. You know what I mean?
Mm.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe it was the access that I got with taking the pictures, getting the backstage, but I didn't have all the fancy equipment or flashes.
Now, with all those different cameras you had over the years, was there a favorite?
Well, let me get through. Then I advanced to medium format. Those are cameras that have negatives that are 4 times bigger than 35 millimeter.
Mm.
So in my late 30s or mid 30s or whatever, I used the medium format. Now, this is before digital. So my pictures were really wow. And, I would carry these great big cameras, but ugh, I get these great pictures. And they were, with 35 millimeter, there was a little bit of grain, but with these big medium format cameras, they looked like 3D. My pictures really stood out.
Wow.
So I've used everything from, I guess, Instamatics to medium formats to now digital.
Wow. So Dick the Bruiser, going back to him, what, in your opinion, looking back, what did he mean for the Midwest territory? What did he mean for Indiana wrestling?
Well, he started championship. Well, he bought his territory from Jim Barnett and Boss Estes. And Jim Barnett left and went to Australia and also was the financed WCW. He's a very important man in the business. But Dick the Bruiser, he was the leader, an icon, and he was very charitable. He visited veterans, was an executive with the National Spinal Cord Association, and they used to sell Dick the Bruiser T-shirts. And I did the picture. They did the Spike Huber T-shirts, and I would do the pictures for the T-shirts. So it taught me to give. You know what I mean? I've had such a fascinating life. I'm starting to realize it, but I've been working. Without thinking, I've worked with charities, and it's probably because of Dick the Bruiser. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
he showed me compassion and never to give up. And because of him, I've got over 50 years in wrestling.
Wow.
Longevity, and I'm still enjoying it.
Yeah. And when it comes to photos, do you have a favorite style, favorite type of photo, whether it be a studio shot backstage with, a promo shot or an action shot at ringside? What do you prefer? Anything over the other?
I don't, having access to celebrities and the wrestlers in the dressing room, and I guess that's easier than ducking down and taking pictures and avoiding the sweat and somebody being thrown into the ropes with my camera, and me going back. My reaction just isn't as fast as it used to be, but I'm still doing it. My favorite picture, well, I don't have a lot of them, but because I've been robbed a couple times and the crazy girls that have torn gone through my negatives, so my stuff is more rare than than it should be. But I still have some, and what I have is quite good. I just don't have the quantity or and a lot of them will never be seen again. And a lot of them are forgotten, but. My favorite picture, I guess, were the ones that I won the Buff photo contest with, and that was Ox Baker and Cowboy Bob Ellis, and it was just positioned so perfectly. I printed that in black and white at my high school dark room,
Oh, yes.
and that won the best picture for the Buff photo contest. Over 200 photos were entered by other people, and the other one was Bruiser versus the Sheik, and that picture ended up, that was in 1975, and I took it in 74. It ended up on the front cover of Big Time Wrestling magazine.
Wow. Let's talk about Cowboy Bob Ellis. He was a big part of that territory for a while. What are your memories of him over the years?
Well, I bet you didn't know he had a wig on, and he didn't want people to slam his head into the turnbuckle. You know what I mean? You were to
No, I
stay
didn't.
away from his hair, but played a role as a good guy. You know what I mean? And was always polite. Now, Bruiser told me if I ever run into Cowboy Bob Ellis, call the police, because he was sort of like an informant too. He had all these powers, with the police department. And why? I guess he was selling thoroughbred horses, regular horses as thoroughbreds or whatever. I'm not sure the exact thing. Putting dye on it, painting, disguising the horse and selling them for a lot more than what it was worth. And that
Wow.
was when he retired. But he made a very reputable WWA champion. Ox Baker, I think, defeated him and became the champion in 1975. Um, but that's what I remember of Cowboy Bob. I had met him a few times, but I wasn't quite in as like I was. It was the beginning of me starting to become a photographer for the WWA. Then he left the territory once he dropped the belt.
I mean, is that the same for Ox Baker? Did you have any interactions with
Oh,
him?
Ox was great. Oh, we were such good friends. He called me up shortly before he died, just to see how I'm doing, how David McLean is doing. Ox was another idol of mine that gave me 100% access to him, including going to his apartment, letting me photograph at home with Ox Baker stories for Afters magazines, and going to the drug stores and grocery stores with them, and him cooking. And then we got together a few times, for a charity show, and we'd have dinner afterwards. He had the Russian Brute with him. He was another one that couldn't stay away, did everything he could to stay significant in the business. And they just would call WWF all the time with an idea that he's got, and they never used it. So poor guy, he faded, and there's a match with him versus Bobo Brazil Jr. It's probably nearly 15 years old now, but he was nearly 80 years old and wrestling him. It was the worst match I've ever seen. I don't even know if it's on the YouTube now, but when it first happened, it came out. He was nice. I became friends with his wife and his son, Jared, whatever he was. And for a moment there, he was like family. For the second Rebuff photo contest, I entered wrestling photos, and with him in it, like I did the last time. They wouldn't have anything to do with them, but they did display the pictures, and I remember taking them to my high school to look at the pictures on display, and meeting the headmaster, and with the mustache, bigger than everybody else. He was quite a shock, and students were running down the hall to get a look at him. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
got all around that Ox Baker is in school.
And when it came to shooting these wrestlers backstage or wherever it may be, was there a favorite that you had to shoot with? Whether it be the nicest to work with, or just easygoing, or just maybe their photos came out amazing every time.
Well, um, everybody that I photographed, I didn't have a problem with, because um, of my connections with Japan and all the other wrestling territories. When I would photograph a wrestler for Japan, I would also get their name and address and telephone number, And I wasn't getting any kickbacks or anything, but I knew that that was beneficial. So it got around the business that I had connections to Japan. Be nice to him. So everybody, heels and baby faces, they were always very cooperative, letting me shoot them. They were probably sniveling or behind the back, fucking Mark, blah blah blah. But to my face, everybody has been very nice to me. Never really had any threats or anything, and have crossed the line just a few times. But I've been able to get away with a lot in the wrestling business to still stay do what I'm doing. Now I'm finding praise. I'm taking bows now.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fun. It's fun.
And what were your experiences like with the culture of Japan and just experiencing everything over there, the food and just how different
Let me
everything is?
make it clear that I didn't work in Japan. So I wasn't there, but I was in all different territories around the United States,
Yeah.
Canada, Mexico, AAA, Stu Hart's territory, um, Chicago, Vern Gagne, Sam Munch, or St. Louis Wrestling Club, all Von Erichs, all the different territories, Mid South, Jarrett's territory, Eddie Marlin's territory. Um, I'm surprised that I could remember all this, but
Yeah.
thank you for letting loose on me. Um, but I never. They always opened the door. I was treated like gold. They would have one of their stooges pick me up from the airport with the sign, holding up a sign, Scott Romer. You know what I mean? And there were times that my plane was late and the Stooges didn't show up with me until the show started, because of weather related things. But I've been treated like gold in wrestling. So thank you very much. In a business where they've treated, where it's been a cutthroat and they're backstabbers. Sure, I've experienced it. It's part of the beauty of it all, and it makes things interesting. So, the person there are times that I have dealt with a promoter or whatever. I had a good dealing with him, but he was a disaster with all the boys, and I've seen him do podcasts, not only one, but a few wrestlers or promoters and stuff like that. But to my face and the position I'm in, I've always been treated with respect.
And you just mentioned a slew of wonderful, territories back then. What was your recollection of, when the WWF really got to that next level and started taking, all of the big talents from all the different territories to become what they are today? What was it like back then experiencing that and seeing a lot of these territories kind of go by the wayside over time?
Well, I still had a job at the time. I was watching organizations become smaller and smaller and less relevant because of the WWF nitpicking the stars. I was watching desperation and promoters trying to get together to promote a big superstar, and because of their egos, it all falling apart. For the next show, nobody wanting to work with anybody. But I still had a job, and then once wrestling started drying up, and I lost I stopped photographing WWF and all the organizations. Very rarely was I even going to wrestling shows. If I did, I'd see new guys. They were 150 pounds. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
in my eyes, they didn't qualify what I had witnessed before, and I took no interest in it. So for several years, I was not a part of it until I hooked up back up with Rip Rogers. And, we became very good friends and driving partners. In fact, he was my roommate up until a few years ago, for a couple of years. And whenever there's a thing at CAC, we room together. He's certainly not going to pay for a room, but we get along fine. Well, I'm sorry. What was your question?
Oh, I was just asking about the different territories and how, some of them went by the wayside when WWF got bigger,
Right,
obviously.
right, 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 right. So they all dried up, and I didn't have anything to do with wrestling until Rip Rogers came, and then I started driving with him to different shows, and every once in a while there was a legend and that I had worked with 20 years prior, and so it brought back good memories, and I became re-addicted to it.
And you're traveling all over doing all these shows, when it comes to venues, did you have a favorite venue
Well,
within all the different territories?
there was the Chase Park Plaza in St. Louis. There was the arena or the Checker Dome in St. Louis, which was even bigger. Um, the Sportatorium, and they all had their personalities. And the fans were a little different in different territories. In World Class Championship Wrestling, when the Von Erichs came out, it was like Ed Sullivan saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles," and you hearing that shriek. In the WWF, when Hulk Hogan came in, it wasn't the same shriek, but it was just a loud cheer. Everybody cheering.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really the venues that stood out. They were the shows and the characters that made the fans react that stood out to make the venues stand out. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure. What would you say has been the greatest challenge for you personally within the wrestling industry over the years?
Well, I find myself, when they introduce me, getting into the ring, getting a little more difficult.
Mm.
When I'm shooting, I just last week I shot a wrestling match. Instead of standing up, and I will get up out of the chair to get the right shot at the right angle, but I'm sitting down. So the cameras are feeling a little heavier. I'm not using the mirrorless, the state of the art mirrorless, which are lighter. And I should use those, but I'm not shooting that much anymore.
Yeah.
Just wrestling once a month or so. You know what I mean? Why buy brand new equipment when I'm gonna, and fuck it up? In wrestling, your camera equipment takes a fucking beating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get close to the action. A guy's throwing a punch. He may knock me out, knock the camera by accident. You know what I mean?
Right.
The cameras that are newer nowadays are lighter weight materials, and more expensive. They'll break. You know what I mean? And if this one takes a more of a beating, so what the fuck? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And that's, obviously that's the greatest challenge. But on the flip side of that, what has the most rewarding part of the wrestling industry been for you?
Well, I would say meeting the fans when I'm at a convention and a fan comes up and remembers Saul Creechman, all three of them for the whole match, for the whole show. But, selling the book and just talking about wrestling like I'm doing to you. That to me is rewarding. I don't know much about anything else other than wrestling, a little bit of boxing and photography. So when somebody is in my environment and talks my language, which is wrestling territorial or whatever, or equipment or whatever, that's rewarding to me
And you
when I'm
mentioned
able
the
to
after
answer the
mags.
question. Huh?
Yeah, no, you mentioned the after mags. That was such a big part of pro wrestling in the early days and even into the 90s. PWI specifically, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, was kind of considered the king of magazines when it came to wrestling. Why don't you just tell us your experiences working with Bill Apter over the years and what it was like?
Well, like I said, I was sending pictures to Apter all the way back to 1975.
Yeah.
As a contributing photographer, not as a staff photographer. Then a fellow by the name of Roger Deem, who was working in St. Louis, working with Sam Munchnick, quit when Sam Munchnick retired. Maybe they got rid of him. So Bill Apter asked me if, can you shoot? We need somebody in St. Louis. Can you shoot it for us? That was my key in. The first match I shot in St. Louis was Ric Flair versus Harley Race. Rick was the champion at the time. Harley defeated him. and won the uh, um, NWA Heavyweight Championship for the record seventh time. Um, my pictures were published in on the cover and on the inside. That was big news. I also sent. I had a second camera. I was breaking the rules a little bit, you know. I had a second camera, and I sent those pictures to Japan, and that was, like I said, that was big news. And so not only was I getting a paycheck from Bill Apter, I was getting a paycheck from Japan. You put the two together, plus the little bit that I was making for Dick the Bruiser and also selling the pictures. So you put it all together, I was making a living in wrestling, you know, all the
Exactly.
years.
Doing what you love, and
Yes.
all these years later, do you have uh are you lucky enough to have a keepsake, something that you still hold dear, that you've had throughout your career?
Well, I'm waking up and smelling the roses. So, yeah, I never realized that my career was so unique. And, now it's kind of sought after to tell my story. So, all things that I do are, and, I'm lucky to be alive. I've had four strokes, Um, so, the last few months, I met this wonderful woman that is in my life, and she's a nurse, and she said, "Scott, I want to take care of you." No telling when I'm going to need the help. In fact, the vehicle that she drives is her dad's wheelchair vehicle. Her dad's passed away, so when I'm due for that, at least I'll have a van.
Right.
That's equipped for me. Um, it's taken so much weight off of me with her interest in wrestling and asking questions. The wrestling has always been a turnoff to the other relationships that I had been in, and including my ex-wife, Dick the Bruiser's daughter. She hated it because she saw her dad get with the stitches and the ex-husband leaving her, but they're together now. You know what I mean? And you know, so most experiences that I have now that I'm eating, I'm grateful for. When I had my stroke, my throat muscles had seized up, and I had a feeding tube for 3 or 4 months. You know what I mean? I
Wow.
wasn't able to chew food or swallow food. I had to, pour shit in a. I've got a scar right here.
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
this is my shirt from Herb Simmons Fan Fest. And this is, I think, last year's or 2 years ago. And let me see. There I am right there.
Ah, very nice.
Right. And he does have a Fan Fest coming up um, on let me see, I wrote it down, on May 8th and 9th in it's in Illinois. I'm sorry, I forgot to write the location, but it's Southern Illinois Championship Wrestling Fan Fest. And, Herb Simmons has always, included me in his events. And again, he's one of the reasons why I have a positive attitude. I love seeing him and the wrestlers and Darla Staggs and all my friends with the CAC, Cauliflower Alley Club. There will be a lot of friends there. So to me, a fan fest is like a reunion.
Absolutely, yeah. You get to reminisce, and it's always nice being appreciated and respected, and you don't get that everywhere. So when you do get it, it's a good feeling, and it's great that we have people like Herb that are doing things like that. SICW, of course, and he's been doing that for years. So it's great to hear that you'll be a part of it once
Well,
again.
I haven't been invited yet, but
Oh,
um, hopefully he'll give me my invitation. And I love him and I love his wife, and it's like when I go to wrestling shows, it's a social event for me. It's not the wrestling ability and stuff. It's seeing everybody, and
yeah,
it's shaking hands and the hugs and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And
right.
it means a lot to me because I didn't have that in my home life.
Yeah.
I was looked at as an oddball because of my involvement in wrestling. Now, if somebody said, "Scott, what are you doing? What have you been doing?" and you say, "Well, I just got a gig with the president," I think I mentioned that before. Dad would say, "He's so full of shit. Don't believe it," and that killed my relationship with all my relatives because they didn't want to talk to me because the leader of the family is saying that I'm full of shit. Now, I sent every one of my family members my book. And I do have a book where it can, is my book. There it is. When It Was My Life on Both Sides of the Ring. And it documents my history in working with boxing and wrestling and celebrities such as the president, the Dalai Lama, Chief Justice of the United States, Robert Downey Jr. All these are people that know me by name. And it's all documented in my book. Not one relative has commented on the book or even said that they read the book. I
Wow.
thought I thought the book would bring me closer to family members, my immediate family members. But I think, in my own opinion, they're staying further away from me. I've like I said, I've been in the hospital. I don't even get phone calls when I'm in the hospital and what could be my deathbed from family members. So more or less, that part of it is written off. So wrestling and boxing fans and the attention that I get, that is like the family that I never had.
Exactly. It's your adopted family. They've taken you in, and you're one of them now, and you have been for so long. And that's
Thank you.
sorry to hear it's like that on the other side, but at least you have this to fill that void.
Discussed some of my family relationship in my book. I mostly my father, and uh, I've received many compliments from people that have said to me, "Scott, I had a difficult relationship with my father too, and I could relate to you." So it's a book that is an enjoyable read, and because I've been able to travel the world on somebody else's dime, hopefully it will bring some inspiration to somebody. It is available on Amazon, and or they could get it through me. If they get it through me, I will autograph it, and it's $5 shipping and $20 for the book.
Excellent.
And we do take Zumo. What is it? We take Zoom Zemo or whatever. What is it called?
Uh, oh,
Zell.
Zell. Yes. Yes.
My apologies. Or send me cash or whatever. Message me with my address if you need to.
Sure.
But it's under Scott Romer, and I've got the book available, and I'll be glad to
Yeah,
see
I certainly encourage the
$25.
fans. $25 is a steal to hear all these stories, and
Yes.
like you said, have the chance to get an autographed copy. So I encourage all the fans to definitely do so. If you have any questions after this interview, contact me, and I can connect you with Scott to get that done and get you a copy. And when it comes to the wrestling business, obviously we talked in
Here's one
depth
of my
about.
covers, by the way.
Oh wow,
That's one of my covers, Von Erich and Flair for Bill Apter's magazine. And my name's on the inside, and on the cover is I've got the main cover that was St. Louis, Kerry Von Erich and Ric Flair. On the other side is Cyndi Lauper. So that's how I got my name around. Here is a from 1976. I did the cover, maybe 1975. Bruiser and Crusher. And again, that was backstage. That will show you my access to wrestling. And throughout the inside are my pictures with my name on it. And um, that was partly here. There we go. 1975. Andre the Giant. And on the
wow.
inside of the Bill Apter magazine, somewhere I'll find it, is I think a story on there it is, At Home with Jacques Goulet,
Oh
Sergeant
yes.
Jacques Goulet, Rene Goulet, and on the inside photos by Scott Romer. 1975, folks.
Wow.
That's how
And
long I've been fucking. That's how long I've been fucking my life up in this business.
what can you share with us about Rene Goulet, the late great Rene Goulet?
Rene called me up. Robert Bedard was his real name. He was French Canadian, not really from France. And um, he was another person that was a father figure to me that let me hang around with him as a child, as a 15-year-old kid. I don't know why they even allowed me into their life, but they did. They had respect for my ability to take pictures. Shortly before he died, he had called me up, just like Ox Baker did. It's really weird. And, I hadn't talked to him for 25 years. And he was looking for Antoinette Miniker, which was Sam Miniker's wife, the ring announcer that Bruce, he was very famous in the business, Sam
Mm.
Miniker. And she was in the Jewish community and a very nice lady. And I'm Jewish. So I got months earlier, I got the news that she had passed away from cancer. So I had to tell Jacques Goulet that she's passed away. And then he had died a few years later, a year or two later. And,
Wow.
I was depressed, but, the wrestlers are dying before my eyes, left and right. And, who knows how long I've got, you know what I mean? So I've lived longer than Dick the Bruiser.
Right. Right. Now, looking back at your wrestling career, obviously, aside from the photography, you've been a part of many other aspects of it, ring announcing and managing. And why don't you tell us about some of the other projects you've been involved in the world of pro wrestling?
Well, the ring announcing is something I was able to do uh, because the ring announcer didn't show up.
Yep.
And I became a ring announcer. And then, because I was a ring, can you come to this show and ring announce? Can you come? That's not my forte, really, but I did it anyways. And, I was probably average at best. And with Dick the Bruiser, I used to have to help set up the ring. Um, um, you know, um, and then when I worked Ohio Valley Wrestling, Brock Lesnar and Sheldon Benjamin and John Cena during that era. And I was just an outside photographer. But after the show, you saw everybody tearing down the ring. It didn't matter if it was Cena or Sheldon or Brock. They were all helping set up and tear down the ring. And they had it all set up and torn down and in probably an hour each time with a dozen people. When I had to set up the ring, it was me and Calypso Jim, who's Bobo Brazil Jr. We would drive the truck together, and we would when we turned into the armory or wherever they had the venue, we were hoping there were fans back waiting for us so they could help set up the ring with us, and that was their key to getting in. They made things a lot easier. And there were times that I had to do everything by myself. That meant going to the shows, leaving at 12 o'clock to show up at 2 o'clock or whatever, and setting up the ring for 4 hours, 5 hours. And I've done it myself. How I
Yeah.
was able to figure out how to do it, I don't know, but I did it.
And if you had to pick three, what would your top three matches of all time be in pro wrestling?
Well, Ric Flair versus Bruiser Brody, best 2 out of 3 in St. Louis. You also had Hulk Hogan. Um, who did he wrestle? Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper. There were so many of them. There's really nothing that stands out really completely. When Hulk Hogan came out, and I was in the middle of all that, walking I'm in the back taking pictures of the fans and stuff, and I'm right in the ring, so all the noise is coming right to me. It gave me goosebumps. It didn't matter. No match was, nothing was in particular, but the thing that stands out the most is when Jimmy Suzuki said, "Hey, can you come to Puerto Rico? We're going to do an angle." And he never told me anything, and he sent me airline tickets, and I flew out there, and Onita picked me up, and we went straight to WC World Championship Wrestling in Puerto Rico territory, owned by Carlos Colon, Victor Quinones, and Jose Gonzalez. And I still didn't know where I was going, and we stopped. I was, he and Onita and Jimmy Suzuki are talking Japanese the whole time. I couldn't understand what they were saying. When I walked in to the World Championship Wrestling I Jose Gonzalez was sitting in a chair waiting. He was the first person that I saw. "How are you,
Really?
sir? Good to meet you." Blah
Wow.
blah blah. Oh my God, what is going on? They wouldn't tell me anything. And so, "You got your camera out, Scott?" "Sure." And they went into a dressing room or whatever and pretended to the Puerto Ricans pretended to beat up Onita Giggs's head. He's bleeding everywhere, and they left. "Did you get that? Here, get it again." you know,
Yeah.
and so everybody, all the Puerto Rican, they closed down the building and just left me and Victor Quiones, who was part owner, and Onita, and a few Japanese photographers that were with us. And when they left the building, Onita, I started hearing noises. He's gigging himself. He's gigging himself in the stomach. And I'm thinking, I didn't know whether this was part of the angle or whatever, but he's gigging himself and he's having me take pictures. And there was really just a trickle of blood coming out. The effects, whatever he was wanting me to do, it didn't look very serious. So I said, "Onita, take the blood from the floor that came from your gig from the head and put it right there." And he tore it open a little bit and, put it on there. And then I'm getting pictures of it, and
Yeah.
then they immediately then I took a limousine to the hospital. They had me take pictures of Onita in the hospital.
Wow.
Then I immediately had to give the film to Jimmy Suzuki. He flew to Miami at such and such time to make Federal Express so they could make it so the film could make it to Japan in time for the evening
Wow.
newspaper. My pictures of Onita pretending to be stabbed by Jose Gonzalez were on the front page of the Japanese newspaper, blaming Jose, and he had no idea that they were doing that, blaming Jose for trying to kill him too.
My
And
goodness.
I brought a separate camera with me. So the film I gave to Jimmy Suzuki, I had my own version right here. I kept those quiet for 30 years because, I had heard rumors from Stu Hart that they were going to bring, the whole thing was to bring Jose to Japan for a match with Bruiser Brody, and the Yakuza was going to take care of matters in their own hand. That's what I heard. So I didn't want to do. I kept the film and the pictures, but I didn't do anything until I figured 30 years. It's been 30 years. I showed them up on Hannibal television on
Yeah.
Hannibal, and I had the pictures, and then there's a picture of me and Pogo and Onita afterwards, a couple hours afterwards, and they were fine. So I exposed the whole thing, and it turned into a whirlwind. And Jesse Ventura and Dutch Mantel did a podcast on how inappropriate my pictures were of this horrible event, capitalizing on it. But they were 30 years old.
Right.
1990 was when I did the pictures. They were more closer, maybe to 40 years, but I opened up a whole new can of worms when I finally exposed the pictures.
Hmm. Well, I mean, it's you can't sit on them forever. You gotta show your work, and
Right,
it was the
right.
right time. So, chiming in your inner fan, what would be your Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling, any era?
Well, I would have to say, there were, God, that's a good question. But I would have to say the progression of the WWF and taking over all the territories and me being able to work with the WWF was the Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. And, photography in general, obviously there are lots of other photographers in the world of pro wrestling. Were there any others that you admired or you looked up to over the
Oh,
years?
absolutely. You got George Natapiano, or I'm sorry, George. You got Bill Apter, Dwayne Long, Steve Taylor, um, and now there are photographers that I'm mentoring, that respect what I have done, that call me up all the time for advice, that are taking studio pictures of all the wrestlers at independent shows. They're doing exactly what I did, but I was doing it with 20 to 50,000 people, and
Right.
now I'm doing it with 50 people, and still enjoying it. I'm getting my, I'm doing it just to so I can hang something to do, to still be significant in the business. I certainly don't need the money, and I'm making a lot less now than I did then. Um, um, there were a lot of Mount Rushmore. There was the David Von Erich funeral that I photographed. That was big deal, and I went back to the Von Erich house and did an interview after the funeral. There were like 5,000 people just outside alone, and I had met the minister of the church that did the sermon. Before he left, he saw me shaking Fritz von Erich's hand and giving him a hug. So all of a sudden, I was in with him. He said, "Hey, I'm going to the cemetery," and we were in front of the limousine driving to the cemetery. And so I got the cemetery pictures, and then we went back to the Von Erich house, and I did an interview with the Von Erichs after the funeral. And in comes Bill Apter, and he sees me there. I'm already there, and it shocked him. So, how did he do that? You know what I mean? But there were ways that I was able to manipulate to get the connections, having the know how. And for the Von Erich funeral, where I would have just got pictures on the outside at the, because I couldn't get inside, it was so crowded and security. I was able to get pictures inside the Von Erich house afterwards. So that made my pictures very exclusive. And
And
so
obviously it
everything,
was
all the pictures that I did put me on the map somehow or another.
sure. And obviously that was a devastating time for the Von Erich family, but what were the Von Erichs like in person?
They were always very nice to me because I got them in the magazines.
Right.
I was, became very good friends with Dave Von Erich, and if you go to my profile, my Facebook page, there's pictures with me and David Von Erich and Hercules Hernandez and George Wells and Molly Hatchet, for that matter, taken backstage in St. Louis. Um, I've been with David Von Erich when he's been totally fucked up, and didn't hang around Kerry that much, but I had seen a lot of the guys all fucked up. You know what I mean? Going back to their hotel room. Um, I didn't want to be a part of it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I stayed relatively clean. I participated, but stayed clean. I didn't
Right.
reveal how the sport. I didn't. I stayed kayfabe. I never exposed the business. I would fight. It's real. But I did back in the before it was exposed. I kept kayfabe, and by all means, I protected the business the best I could.
Any memories of Wilbur Snyder?
Absolutely. Wilbur lived in Carmel, Indiana. He was Bruiser's partner. Partly one of the reasons they let me into the dressing room, and again, he was a tennis player, had a tennis court outside, also a great businessman, had property in Florida with Dick the Bruiser, well, their own property. And he would go to Florida, stay tan. Billed as the world's most scientific wrestler. Had a son, Mike. Shirley was his wife, and he stayed active until his mid 50s. And he was a pretty good guy, not a very good um, interviewer. Um, he stuttered a lot, but I absolutely had no problem with him. I had a closer relationship with Dick the Bruiser,
Hmm.
but also I was close with Wilbur too.
And what would you say is the best piece of advice that you'd ever received?
I would say stay loyal to your friends that have helped get you there. Don't abandon them. It will come back to the end. Um, your longevity won't last forever. So part of my longevity is that I have stayed loyal with friends. I'm still invited to Italian parties every several times a year with very prominent businessmen and leaders, and um, so staying loyal to your friends and family. Give them a hug. Tell them you love them, because um, I didn't get that from the family, and so I know what I've never been much of a family man because I never had much of a family that really cared. But stay loyal to your friends is what I would say.
And obviously, you mentioned CAC and how they have helped you out. Why don't you tell us all about CAC for the fans that aren't familiar? What they are and some of your experiences there and what they have done for you.
Well, CAC is a non for profit organization that helps down and out wrestlers. They're going to be celebrating their 60th year. It was founded 60 years ago by Iron Mike McZerky, who was a wrestler and actor. They used to honor actors. Every once in a while, they will honor an actor. 2 years ago, it was the African American gentleman. Not Gary Coleman, his co-star. He had been in trouble a few times.
Mm,
Uh, what I can't remember his name,
not too
but
sure.
I'm sorry. Ask me the question again. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Oh
I
yeah, no, just the CAC in general, what they've done
Oh,
for you and what they
CAC.
stand
Okay,
for.
right. CAC. I'm sorry. Excuse me, CAC. That's why you helped me out. Memory problems. But um, when I had a stroke, they actually reached out to me. Scott, is there anything that you can do, that we can do for you? And they took care of 2 months of my rent. I was down and out, didn't eat. I was in the hospital, 2 weeks in the hospital, 2 weeks rehab, no income, and they paid for my rent.
Wow.
So I'm forever indebted to them for doing that. I've been their official photographer, one of the official photographers, since 2011, when I first showed up. As I mentioned, it will be their 60th year. They haven't mentioned who they're going to be honoring yet. But I photograph it, and it's archived and kept in their archives, and part of the organization. And it's a way to also, if you are a member, to reconnect with the old legends, the Stan Hansens, the Barbara Brody, Barbara Goodish, Brody's wife is on the board. Brian Blair is the president. You've got um, Rich, and um, Herb Simmons, and all those people got together and said, "Hey, let's help Scott Romer out,"
Yeah.
and it also gave me an appreciation of the business, knowing that I was appreciated by them helping me out. Uh, to become a member, I think it's like $140 or $150 a year. They have a banquet and an award ceremony, and they call it a bologna blowout. That's where we have well, the roast beef and cold cut sandwiches, because that's how we lived on the road on one
Wow.
of the days. But it is, again, the CAC and the members there are my family, and I missed it one year because I was pissed off at one guy that's no longer on the board, and I got why miss it because of somebody pissing me off. I don't go for the award or anything. I go there to reconnect and see my friends. You know what I mean?
Sure. Now, what advice do you have for an aspiring photographer just getting into the industry or wanting to get into the pro wrestling world?
Well, pictures from the outside, from your ringside seat, aren't really going to hack it. So the idea is to ask the promoter if it's all right if they could shoot at ringside, and they'll stay out of the way of the fans, stay low, but they, make sure they have a professional camera, a cell phone, even though they take beautiful pictures, just aren't going to do it. So stay out of the way of the fans, and be careful, and give the promoter a few of your best pictures so you're invited back at the next match.
And do you still watch wrestling today?
Yes, I do, because my girlfriend loves it. She knows the names, and she'll turn it on. Honey, the wrestling's on. So I'll watch it, and she'll, oh, that looked fake, or I can tell that's choreographed or whatever. But she's getting smart by watching it, and listening to my interviews, and again taking an interest in it.
Any
Companions
standouts for you?
taking it. How you can't ask for anything more. Wrestling has been a little secret. Like, again, it's been a turnoff to so many people.
Right.
And she wants to go to the conventions with me, and she knows to kind of stay out of my hair too. You know what I mean? Let me do my own
Sure.
thing. So
Right.
it's perfect for me.
Any standouts for you in today's world of wrestling?
Any standouts? You got you've a very powerful man, Shane Mosler. I'm sorry, I can't remember the
That's
name, but he tosses people out. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he can carry people. He's got such strength that he could do things off the top rope and not hurt the other wrestler.
yeah.
Little, advice is, listen, you're not getting paid very much money, if anything at all. Don't do anything that will affect that will hurt you, concussions or moves that will hurt you or another opponent. You know what I mean? Keep it safe, work light, and that will give you longevity. It's the ones that think that they're tough, that are taking chair shots. Those will, eventually it will, you know, fuck your body up.
And obviously, you're not just pro wrestling, like you mentioned. You're a world renowned photographer. You've worked with celebrities and walked with presidents and all of that. Why don't you tell us about that? Tell the fans what you've done outside of the wrestling industry, some of the celebrities you've worked with, and some of those great experiences.
Well, first of all, I'm no different than anybody else out there, except I was able to um, hang on the coattail of some very, very important people, which allowed me to be seen with very important people, which was sort of a pass to do whatever I wanted. And my clearance to shoot the President of the United States was, oh, he's with us, without getting detailed Secret Service clearance. That was for an Italian organization, the National Italian American Foundation, that I was the head photographer for.
Yeah.
Do the math when you hear that word, what else is involved, but we won't talk about that. I've worked with chief justices of the United States. I worked with Robert Downey. I was, going to LA. I went to LA. I was at a fancy hotel room. I had to pay for it, because it was a bar mitzvah with his niece. And so I stayed at this fancy hotel. As soon as it was over, I got a hotel in the worst part of Hollywood. You know what I mean? Next,
Yeah.
it was cheaper. What do I care?
Right.
But um, I've worked. At these events that I go to, they don't tell me the guest list, and I'm part of it, and they're there. The Nancy Sinatras. A lot of them are um, like has-beens, I guess you might say. The Tony Orlandos of Dawn. I was with him not too long ago. Gina Lola Brigida. Sophia Loren. Um, the list goes on and on. So my I don't act overly excited to be in their presence. Again, I act very nonchalant, get the picture, and stay low key. I don't ask for autographs, but I will ask for my picture with them, and that's part of my collection. And my appeal is that I have had my picture taken with so many celebrities, and and
Are those
also,
posted anywhere?
huh?
Are
Are
those
they
posted
posted?
anywhere for people to
Yes.
see?
Go to my Facebook page and look at the pictures. You'll see so much. Go to just do a Google search on me. Just type in Scott Romer images, and it will have pictures of me working with presidents and fighters and actors and actresses and my boxing and all that others. Google has taken a keen interest into my life. Every time I post something and do a Scott Romer AI, something more incredible pops up, which it's all documented and the truth.
Right.
And when I read about myself, I don't even believe it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you're doing so many, huge things like this for so many years, you tend to forget things and, oh wow, that's right. I accomplished that, or, whatever it may be. And going back to the territories, do you have any memories of the assassin?
Joe Hamilton, who was working with WCW, and I had gone to Rip Rogers a couple times to Atlanta Center Stage, where Joe Hamilton was working as Joe Hamilton, the agent. But there were times that I worked with the assassin when he was under the mask, but I didn't deal with him personally other than photographing a few matches of his. You know what I mean? Not a lot of one-on-one contact until WCW taping.
Any memories of Bobby the Brain Heenan?
Absolutely. I took Bobby the Brains Heenan's place a couple of years later as Saul Creechman. Now, Bobby can't be replaced. He was the best manager, best speaker, and was one of the reasons why the WWA was so successful. Was he appreciated by Dick the Bruiser? According to his pay, no. And he got very resentful to Dick for the payoffs and stuff like that. He finally left the territory and became a star with other territories, starting with Georgia in 1974, and then he went to Vern Gagne's AWA, and then was drafted to the WWF, where he became a color commentator. Um, um, when Steve Taylor would take me to the after parties at the hotel in St. Louis after the WWF matches, and he introducing me to people. He said, "And this is Bobby Heenan." Bobby already knew who I was, and first thing he says to me, "How is everything in the insane asylum?" That meant Bruiser and his wife. I live next door to Dick the Bruiser and his wife, and the craziness of having a mother-in-law that was a former dancer and Dick the Bruiser, the barroom brawler, and they lived next door. So it was always very comical. And by Bobby Heenan saying, "How is everything in the insane asylum?" and how Dick the Bruiser and my mother-in-law, Mrs. Afflis, we called her, they were meant to be with each other. There are no two people that are crazier and perfect for each other than Dick the Bruiser and my mother-in-law.
And the WWA would go on to have a working relationship for quite a while with the AWA. Any memories of Vern Gagne or Greg Gagne?
Absolutely. I was a photographer in the AWA as well. Again, the promoters and the people of importance, they knew I was there, but I avoided them as much as possible. I recently posted a picture of Vern Gagne and Jim Barnett that I did backstage. Um, Again, because I stayed low key, it kept me in my position as a backstage photographer, but I did it all low key and tried my best not to be noticed, and it worked.
How about Andre the Giant? Obviously, you showed us the magazine cover. Any interactions with Andre over the years?
Well, I was working in Las Vegas at the Showboat Hotel, AWA show, and Andre was on it. And I had met a girl. I think she was a prostitute, but we were out getting drinks. And I'll never forget. We went back to my house, my room, not to have sex, but she had to go to the bathroom, and she did it with the door open and everything, so I could see everything. And she was actually a sort of foreigner, but we went back to the bar, and I bought her another drink, and she was sort of hot in a way, skimpy dress. I was young. I didn't really know about prostitutes back in those days. But sure enough, when Andre the Giant showed up, I look up, it was my time to leave. So I had to get up and leave him. I've been backstage with him a few times. Andre didn't want to be messed with that much, so I didn't really um, bother him that much, but I would watch the wrestlers get ready to go out and stuff. And there are a few pictures I got of Andre. One in particular is he's shaking a young guy's hand, and you could see how big his hand is, and and the kid's looking up, and
Yeah.
I took pictures that really stood out, and again, that was the key to my success. Anybody could do what I've done, but I captured the images at a perfect moment, and that was it.
Any memories of Mr. Indiana, Tom Lynch?
Yes, yes. I think I wrestled Tom. He was from South Bend, Indiana, and a weightlifter, and he just died maybe a year or two ago. Um, uh, didn't really get the um, position that he deserved. A good, solid worker, but always an underneath guy, an opening match.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your in ring career, and how long that went for you, and some of your highlights from that period?
Well, I've even had a match up until 2017, but there was really no formal training. Dick the Bruiser told me, why don't you move in next door and grow a beard? I could use you as a manager. When I went next door to Dick the Bruiser's house, he used to yell at me because we were on TV, and he would yell at me, "You're supposed to wear a disguise when you come over." So they wouldn't see the two of us being friendly. So I used to have to wear a hat. When people drove by and looked over, um, they saw Bruiser talking to a guy in a hat, not Saul Creechman, his arch enemy, for all
Right.
50 people that were showing up. But no, we had pretty good crowds. But during my reign, I think it was sort of the beginning of the end of the WWA. After Heenan left, it was really never the same. They brought in Johnny Starr, who was a great worker, and managed Ox Baker and the Legionnaires, Chuck the Monster O'Connor. He had a manager by the name of Rooster Griffith, and he drew heat, and he was fired for hitting a fan. So that's when they brought me in. I
Mm.
had really no formal training, but I had such an interest in it, and my biggest match was the one I had in the eighth grade at Orchard School. So I grew my beard, but I, future kid, you're too you're working too stiff, and they whisper in my ear or whatever. So you learn to work light, and I became I drew a lot of heat as a wrestler. I knew how to work the crowd, I knew the timing, and it was because of my interest in all the years. All I was doing was just imitating what Bobby Heenan was doing,
Yeah.
in my own way, and it drew enormous heat for of course we didn't have the 5,000 fans back in those days, but we did have, there were a couple sellouts at the Tyndall Armory, and then it kept getting smaller and smaller, and then David McLean brought the WWA to the Vogue Theater, and then he left and did his Glow and all that other stuff. But it was just going downhill. Now, the WWA was revised by Dr. Jerry Graham, who became partners with Dick the Bruiser, and they ran Bruiser Bedlam together in
Yes.
Detroit, and they were televised. But that was the end of when that ended. That was sort of like the end of Dick the Bruiser until he was a guest referee for Starrcade Sting against the Black whatever with when Ric Flair was under the mask. Dick the Bruiser was a special guest referee. He was fat and out of shape, and his health was failing. And in his mind, he thought he could compete with the best of them. I remember he was a free for all happened. He was hitting the guy, and they were hitting him back, and he was no selling. But it was a guy that couldn't get on the up off the mat. He was hanging onto the rope while making the count and stuff like that, to get up. And it was sort of very, very sad to see him deteriorate. And it wasn't more than a year or so after that he had passed away.
We talked about Mr. Yamaguchi and some of the other photographers, Bill Apter, obviously Steve Taylor. We talked about George Napolitano. Two others that we lost in recent years. I'm not sure if you have any memories of them, Mr. Bob Mulrin and Blackjack Brown.
I'm sorry, I don't know those guys.
Okay. Yeah, they did it for a while in some different areas. How about Roy London?
Yes, Roy and I worked together a bunch of times. I would pick him up at the airport and stuff, and he was with GC Lennon Publishing, an assistant of Bill Apter. And, those guys made it big in the wrestling business. You can't get any bigger than Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Roy was one of the staff members.
Yeah, Roy's a good guy for sure. We had him on the podcast about a month ago, and just another good guy in the wrestling world.
I think he wrote me and mentioned something about you.
Oh, did he?
Come to think of it, yeah. And I hadn't heard from him for years, but he had said something about. Let me see. I'm putting that in right now. Go ahead, ask me a question while I'm doing this.
Yeah, so basically, when it comes to the Dingo Warrior, his early days prior to Ultimate Warrior, any memories working with him?
Just in Texas as the Dingo Warrior. Um, he teamed with Sting. I forgot the name of their team, but he was somebody I didn't deal with very often. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When guys were real serious, you can tell the guys that didn't want to get fucked with. You know what I mean?
Right.
And pacing around the dressing room and stuff like that. What am I going to do? Hey, can I get some pictures? And they, stop and let me do it. But
Sure.
if they're so into themselves and stuff like that, I let them be. And those were pictures that I didn't get for the magazine. So
Right.
the ones that weren't cooperative were the ones that didn't get published. It was that simple.
Yeah. And with all the things that you've accomplished, all the things you've done in the industry and outside of the industry, if you could pick one moment, what would that number one moment in your career be thus far?
Um, one moment in my career. Well, when the first person I ever managed, I wore an old suit and found in Bruiser's garage sunglasses and a cane, and I had no idea. And when I showed up at the show, Scott, you're managing Harley Race, so I'm
Wow.
immediately over. You know what I mean? And I was working in the ring with Harley Race, and to be that close with him, even as a photographer, you're back a little. He was able to throw his voice in the ring where you couldn't hear it anything else. And he would use his mouth. Say he would get smacked, and he would use his mouth, and it would rather than they didn't do the slap, he would, and you'd think, oh my God, he got hit in the mouth, and spit would come out and stuff like that. When I wrestled and got the shit beat out of me, I'd work up a snot ball and then wait for them to hit me in the chest, and it'd spin, and then hopefully it went far enough and the fans would duck it. Um, I would even find somebody that was really shitty at me and try to get that spit to hit him. You know what I mean? It was fun, and I wrestled Dick the Bruiser. That was an experience. I'm in the ring with the guys that I photographed as a smart mark. Now I'm working as a pro wrestler and working in the ring with the Moose Cholocks, the Bobo Brazils, the Harley Races of the world.
Yeah.
Cactus
Like,
Jack, Rip Rogers, the list goes on. Honky Tonk Man. Each time I'm put against somebody is an experience, and then I work a show, and you got Jake the Snake, you got Tito Santana, you got Demolition on the show, you got Hacksaw Jim Dugan, fresh right out of the WWF, and Scott Romer is working with them side by side. In fact, in matches with them.
when we talked a little bit about off camera about it, why don't we kind of go into your boxing career and tell us a little bit about that whole experience for you?
Well, in my since I had, and I don't mean to harp on it that much, but I had a father that never paid attention to me, and he was, in fact, quite abusive, and from early on. And so I found in my career, I found father figures to substitute him. Nothing could be really substitute a real father. And I never had a real father that I felt like I had a real father. So the people that I mentioned are like my real fathers. You've got one is Sam Mineker, who was the ring announcer, who's the one that Bruiser made um, take me to the wrestling shows and back with David McLean. Um, he was like a father figure. You've got um, Dick the Bruiser, who's another father figure. And then two other people. Fred Burns. Fred Burns was my best friend. He died about a year and a half ago. He was also a boxing promoter, and I became his official photographer. He sent me around the world with local fighters to get beat up, and made me I used to collect their money and make sure that their hands were tied, that they were in training. If they were a little overweight for their match, I would stick them in the sauna, and they were usually beat up on the first round, the first punch. But they got big bucks, and I would customs only allows $10,000 per person. I had very minimum money on me at the time, so I'd carry the other $10,000 back in my underwear. I would go through customs with all this money in my underwear, and then it's I feel it falling out of my underwear and down my pants in front of customs. But um, um, I would then turn in all my money, and the promoter would count it. And, now it's in my pants, so he's counting it. And one, two, there's $100 missing, Scott. Where's the $100? I gave you everything, and it stuck to my ass. Here you go. You can have it.
Right.
That was my pay.
Yeah.
But Fred Burns was a 50-year relationship. And every week we have a boxing lunch with us down and out people in the fighting business and talking about the past. And one of our regulars is a fighter by the name of Craig Hauk, Houk, and he created the Indiana Boxing Hall of Fame. And he goes to all the Hall of Fames all over the country and finds reputable fighters to be inducted into Indiana. More or less, they never fought in Indiana, but they're attractions. Buster Douglas is one of them. Floyd Patterson, who's deceased, is going to be inducted. His son is going to be inducted, and they're inducting me as the first photographer the first photographer in the Indiana Boxing Hall of Fame. So I will be inducted with on a 2-day event with
Congratulations.
famous fighters. James Toney will be there, Michael Spinks, hopefully Ray Boom Boom Mancini, whatever. And then in the summertime, there's a parade in the Swiss County Parade, and they make a float for me with my name on it. And I wave to fans, who is he? All 5 fans are clapping, and I'm waving. And, who is he, Martha? Shut up, keep waving.
Yeah.
But, world renowned photographer Scott Romer, it's hand painted on a 39-cent poster board, and I
Wow.
wave. It's fun. It's awfully fun, though.
That's great. Yeah, so certainly a highlight, one of many that you've had in your career. And in closing, Scott, fast forward many years from now, looking back at your career as a whole, what would you say is your legacy? How do you want to be remembered?
Well, that's a good question. How do I want to? I'm going to be remembered by the pictures that I take, and that is my legacy. Are the pictures that I take, and I donated pictures of all my bar mitzvahs that I have taken, the best pictures that I used in my sample albums when I was an active photographer to get other bar mitzvahs and weddings in the Jewish community. I donated those to the Indiana Jewish Historical Society because some of those people that I photographed at 13 are now prominent businessmen in the Jewish community. So my legacy is to record historical moments in wrestling and boxing, not so much boxing anymore, but and making people happy with my pictures. Part of my success is people really don't say bad things about me, and I've never really had to cut people's throats to get in my position that I'm in.
Yeah.
Nobody has ever said Scott Romer is a backstabber or Scott Romer is a thief or he took money from me or whatever. I will admit I will go to I have a coupon. I will tell them it's my birthday and they'll give me the free hamburger each. And, I'll be, 100 years old this month alone. But, hopefully I didn't hurt anybody. And I am going to move my grave to a different cemetery because I was so ignored by my family that why should I be a part of that? So I'm going to move my grave to where my good friend Fred Burns was, and it's a much more upbeat graveyard too. You know what I mean? Than the old one with 1870 headstones, and it's full of old, I was dismissed by my family, and sadly enough, and that I will be with my friend who was my father figure and his family, who brought me into their family that didn't discriminate me and gave me all kinds of opportunities.
Sure. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us on the All Access podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure and a great conversation. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Joe. I look forward to seeing it on. When will it be published, by the way?
So, yeah, this will probably be out in about 2 weeks or so.
Okay, let me know. Thank you,
No problem.
everybody, and hope you enjoyed the interview.
Absolutely. For the great Scott Romer, I'm Joseph Bruen, and this has been the All Access Entertainment Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave your comments. We'd love to hear from you, the fans, what you thought of this episode and what you'd like to see next time. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.